Now, one of the things that we discussed, we were talking about yesterday, just kind of ran by everybody, was this mystery of faith, the mysterium fidei. And for those who weren't here, I'm just going to kind of recap it just a little bit. You see, this timeline, this is kind of like the history of faith, and that's the reason. This kind of vision is what all other Christian denominations and religious, people see, because they look back 2,000 years. Here's the creation, Adam and Eve, and so forth. And here is now, and this is at the end of time. Well, they look back. That's why almost all other Christian denominations will take Christ off the cross, because it's a done deal. It's finished. Past tense. He lived, past tense. Died, past tense. Rose, past tense. And we realize that throughout the mystery of faith that is presented to us through Scripture, through 2,000 years of constant teaching of the Holy Spirit, and through the very words of sacred Scripture, we realize that God is in the center of time. It's not like this at all. Oh, this is valid. I mean, if you're a historian, this is great. But if you are a Roman Catholic Christian, we realize that God is in the center of time. And all of time, every single aspect, any iota of time, is constantly present to God in his I am. And so therefore, we, through the Mass, through the sacraments we confect and we receive, through sanctifying grace, the indwelling of the Trinity, we are able to enter into this I am of God, into this mystery, and therefore we are literally at every Mass at Calvary. In other words, we are not just playing a game. We don't look back 2,000 years, but we actually enter into the mystery. So the mystery is not something that is devoid. It's not something that we just study. It is something that we partake in. We are literally, to a certain extent, transported. If you've ever been in Rome, you'd notice that every single cathedral, every single main basilica is built in such a way, and when I took the kids there, I said, look up. Always when you go into a church, look up. And they would look up and, oh, look at that. And they would see all these beautiful things. And I said, now look down. And in the floor, in most of the churches, is mirrored the basic design of the ceiling. And they said, why is that, Father? And I said, because when they built these churches, they wanted to make it very clear that we are dealing with something greater than just what is here and now. In other words, all of heaven is participating in the Mass. All of the suffering souls in purgatory are participating in the Mass, because there are three elements of the church: triumphant, patente, and militant. And we are in the militant church. Obviously, you guys know this. Now, very little, if anything, that I say is going to be a revelation, as you know, because you guys probably have a better education than I do in most cases. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a few things that His Eminence has asked me to present before he gets here, kind of to prepare the water, so to speak. And we've already discussed the definition of the priest and shepherd. You see, the shepherd has to understand that he is the first one who's the beneficiary of the sacraments that he distributes. The more we hear confessions, the more priestly we become. Actually, the more in love with our priesthood we become. I have seen it always in my life. When priests shy away from confession, they don't hear confessions, they eventually lose the fervor and the desire of their priesthood. It is the one thing that you can do, that when you're finished, instead of bearing the weight of the world, you're freed. You know, in all the professions, in all the possible things that you can do on earth, there are two that are at the opposite spectrum when it comes to suicide. Psychiatrists have the highest rate of suicide. Priests have the lowest. And why? We all listen to the problems of the world. We all listen to the difficulties. The difference is this. The psychiatrist has to keep it within. They have to constantly be bringing it up all the time. We, as priests, we realize that when God forgives, he forgets. And this is the great hope of the people, because they need this liberation from the evils of sin and from their past and from their wounds. Now, we as shepherds have a duty. And if we look at the new evangelization, if you want to really kind of boil it down into one word, the one word in the new evangelization is why. Because everyone has a right to know why. I mean, that's the one thing we can ask all our whole lives long, and we have a right to an answer, and we as priests have an obligation to give it. How many times do we hear people say, why is this, Father? I go to my Protestant relative friends, and I go to their church, and they have a cross instead of a crucifix. Why do we have Christ on the cross? Well, this is the reason, because obviously, as I told you yesterday, the reason why we have Christ on the cross is because he's still hanging on the cross. In this mystery of faith, in God's I am, in his eternal now, Christ is on the cross. He is being born in the stable of Bethlehem. He is dying. He is rising from the dead. He is in heaven. All of this is already taking place and is constant. It is not something that is over. We are not a resurrection people. And if you've ever seen the Resurectcifixes, theologically, an odd idea, because it doesn't make sense, because we are not a resurrection people. We are living in the hope of the resurrection, but until the last soul is saved, Christ will be on that cross. And then after that time ends, when everything comes to fulfillment, then the great sign of the cross will appear. You notice there's never spoken a sign of the cross anywhere until they're referring to the end of time. Because it is at that moment that all of that which is constantly before the eye of God will be over. It will be done. It will be finished, accomplished. Now, why? There is a need in our people, in our own beings, to understand why. You know, we all hear confessions a lot, and sometimes I ask people, do you know why that's a sin? I'm going to give you a real easy question. You've all dealt with it a lot, you know, in confession, I'm sure. Masturbation. I always stop by saying, do you know why masturbation is a sin? And usually they give me some story of, well, spilling of the seed. I say, how good has that worked? You know, that's really going to get you to stop that? Do you know really why it's a sin? And then I explain it to them. And so usually I tell them, look, every single time you commit that sin, there's a fantasy. Now, in that fantasy is flawless. It's perfect. How many times has the person, burped? Never. It's flawless. Now, this is the reasoning. You take something you can never have, and you attach to it the most intense physical pleasure you can give yourself. And every peddler of porn knows, and the devil knows, that if he can get you hooked on the fantasy, there's not a person on the face of this earth, there's not a saint in heaven that will ever make you happy. Because you will always be searching for the fulfillment of something you can never have. There was a man who came up to me in Brazil, I think it was, and good-looking guy, beautiful wife, a model, and a couple kids, and he nudged me during a fair they were having. He just leaned over and he said, Father, I need to talk to you. I cheated on my wife. First thing I said was, how long have you been masturbating? How in heaven's name did you know I masturbate? I said, because even your wife, as beautiful as she is, can no longer live up to the fantasy you've created. And he looked at me and he said, you mean I've been destroying my life for something so stupid? I said, yep. It's one of the most insidious sins. That's what I tell them. Because we all think it's a baby game, that it's for kids. And no, it's nothing. It erodes pure and perfect love, because no love is perfect. And that's the first thing they learn after they're married for a week. Okay, now, some people ask, why do you wear black, Father? They need to know. I didn't know for quite a while as a seminarian until I found out. In the catacombs, in the time of Jesus and after Jesus, ink was a brownish red. And so what they did in the catacombs was they would mix a dye that would take on a black hue to it. And they would leave messages because they used black as a mystical symbol of God uniting with man. Now, most certainly black is slimming, but in my case it doesn't work. But it is a symbol and represents the God-made man, the fact that we have become the sacrament we receive. There's no question about that. Like the bread and wine become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, we become the alter Christus. We become the sacrament. We are the matter of the sacrament, and so we become the sacrament, and the church gives us the black in order to become aware that we are always representing, but we are always acting, should be acting in the persona Christi, or at least in his name for the most part. Now the collar, we know that. It was originally intended so that everyone would know when they see you on sight that you have the power to forgive sins. That's why when someone isn't conferred or delegated faculties, they have to, by church law, remove the collar. Because this is the sign that you and I can forgive sins. And I'm sure you, just like I've heard more sins, confessions, out of the confessional than I have ever heard in the confessional. I've heard them in planes. I've heard them in grocery stores. By the way, if you ever hear a confession in a grocery store, go to the broccoli. It absorbs sound. If you're hearing in Walmart, I've heard confessions in Walmart, believe it or not. The customer, the employees, I took them to the, you know where they sell the radios and stuff? Those speakers suck up sound. And you can talk, if you just walk through there once, and you'd be talking like this, and all of a sudden it goes like this, because it absorbs the sound. The sacraments are there for when and however the faithful need it. I've heard confessions at stop signs. I sat through a couple of lights, but I was able to hear a stop sign. If somebody refers to me as Father, I know they're Catholic, and eventually we get around to, well, how long has it been since you've been to confession? And I'll tell you this, I have never had anyone not thank me for hearing their confession, because most people are waiting. Most people are frightened because they don't know how to do it anymore. They were told by some that they could do general confessions where you just have everybody gets an absolution, and they've never said their act of contrition in 40 years. They haven't even gone to see a priest in 30, 35 years. And so for them, if you say, listen, I'm going to take you through it. I'll even tell you the sins. All you have to do is go, Or say often, on occasion, seldom, or never. Give me an idea. And then they return to their baptismal innocence. This is part of our identity. We as shepherds forgive. That's the reason we became priests. Everything Jesus did in his life, every single thing, was about forgiveness. Go in peace, sin no more. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. He said those words while they were nailing him to the cross. He was constantly forgiving. That was the first thing he did, because that was healing. Because in the times of the Jews, sin was reflected in pain and suffering. So if you were ill, if you had leprosy, you were a sinner. You were being punished for your sins. And so Christ came and he cured them, because he shows us that that's exactly what a shepherd does. He binds up the wounds. Now, they say forgiveness. How many times people come up and say, why should I forgive? I remember there was this one woman, she goes to me and she says, I'm talking about forgiveness. She says, well, I'm not going to forgive my sister until she apologizes to me. I do construction, so I always have wood in my car. So I went and I got a 2x4 and I came in the house and into the thing. And I says, here, this is for you. What's this for? I said, this is to beat yourself on the head with, because it's probably going to be a lot less painful than what you're doing with your sister. I said, don't you realize that when you do not forgive somebody, you are hurting yourself? In the Our Father, the most intense word is as. The tiniest word in the Our Father, but it's the most important and intense, because we say, in every Our Father, we teach the people, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That means I want you, God, to forgive me in the exact same way I forgive everyone. If I hold anything away against somebody, I want you to hold it against me. And forgiveness is not about necessarily the other person. It's about ourselves. There was a woman. She had been a young girl. She had been raped by her father, 3 brothers, and an uncle for 7 years in Mexico. And she was in a convent, and she was a mess. She would cry all the time. She was just horrible. The psychiatrists were talking to her, and she was just a mess. She would cry for days. She couldn't even move. She couldn't even eat. And the doctor said, she's going to be this way. There's nothing we can do. And I talked to her once, and I said, what's going on? You know, I've seen you for a year now, and you get a little bit better, and then you get... She says, well, I don't think I can ever do what the doctors are telling me to do. I said, what are they telling you to do? Well, I must speak to my mother and my father. I must speak to my brothers and let them know that I don't accept what they did to me, and get them to admit what they've done. And I said, oh, for the love of the good Lord, that's not the way to heal. I said, this is what you do. Every single time you think of your father and your brothers and sisters, whatever they did to you,
I want you to say this prayer. God, forgive them and help me to forgive them too. And every single time you think of them, instead of ripping open the wound, because that's exactly what we do. Every single time we're hurt by someone, and that's what happens when people sin against us. It causes a wound inside of us. And every single time we rip it open and we look at it, and how many people do this all the time? They're constantly looking at the wound. They're killing themselves. They're making the wounds fester. And so when you tell them, look, just keep forgiving. Don't care how you feel. Don't care. It's not about how you feel, because remember we talked yesterday that forgiveness, love, all these things are acts of the will, not of the emotions. So you'll never feel warm and fuzzy, and thanks be to God, he doesn't require us to like our enemies. Then we have to be schizophrenic, obviously. So he says, love your enemies. And love is very possible because it's an act of the will. It doesn't depend on how we feel ever. So as you say that prayer, God, forgive them and help me to forgive them too, you'll be putting a healing ointment on that wound if you don't rip it open. And you keep doing that. You might have to say that prayer 5,000 times, maybe 150, 200, 300 times a day. But I promise you that there'll come a time when all of a sudden you'll go, God, forgive. It's gone. It's gone. I'm free. I don't like them, and I may never have anything to do with them again, but I'm free. That's why forgiveness was so important to Christ, because it's the basis for all our healing. That goes for us too. How many times have people done things to us as priests, and we have to forgive them so that we can be indifferent to their evil. And once they forgive, once they learn how to forgive and that wound is healed, no one will ever have that kind of power over them again. Because when we have that wound and we keep looking at it, we extend power to the person who hurt us. Never, I teach people all the time, never make your joy, your peace, your healing contingent on anyone other than you. Because to tell you the truth, a lot of people, when they come to you and they're coming to get married and they say, oh, she completes me. Oh, shut up. I says, if you're not whole before you enter into this marriage, don't bring her into your hell. You got to be whole. You've got to be happy. You've got to be joyful within yourself first. Joy isn't something that depends upon the people around us. It doesn't depend upon our bishop or the pastor of the parish. It doesn't even depend upon the kind of people that we serve. If that's what we're expecting, we're going to be really miserable. A very wonderful priest. He was a Marxist philosopher before he became a priest. And he said to me, to expect more than anyone is able to give you is to condemn yourself to a bad attitude. And that's true. We can't expect others to be our joy. We can't expect them to be the reason why we're happy. People come to me and they say, I'm not happy at my work. Well, who is? We all have to work. We all have to suffer. But, I understand where you're coming from. But don't make them the reason for your misery. If you're miserable, it's because you want to be. My grandpa, curmudgeon, defined it. And I remember one day I was sitting out in the yard with him and in his house, and he was sitting there, and there were all these beautiful flowers in the trees, springtime, and the wind blew, and they just cascaded down almost like snow, and the smell of the flowers were incredible. It was apple tree. And he said, Grandpa, isn't that beautiful? And he looked at me and he said, you want to know something? I guarantee you that at least 4, 5, 6 of those flowers will become apples. And they're going to fall on my car or beam me on the head. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go a little farther away. So I looked at the street. I said, look at the green of those trees, those beautiful, majestic trees. It's a vibrant green. You can almost taste it. And he looked at me and he said, you want to know something? Every one of those stinking leaves are going to blow into my yard come fall. I said, well, I give up. So then one day, it was wintertime. It was deader than a doornail outside. There was nothing. It was no snow, nothing on the ground. It was cold. And I went in, and my grandpa had kept all the windows closed. It was like a crypt in his house. And I remember that they were sitting and playing solitaire, and I'm talking to my grandma, and finally, after about 2 hours, my grandma says, let's go in the living room. Well, everything was locked up, so she says, open the shades. I'm so tired of the darkness. And so I opened the drapes, and there we saw for the first time that it had been a blizzard outside. We didn't even know. Snow all over the place. And my grandmother saying, praise the Lord, the snow, the chill, the wind. She was one of these people who said the St. Bridget prayers 1,000 times over. And so finally she calls out to my grandpa. She says, George, come in here. What do you want, Bernice? George, come in here quick. You got to see this. All right, hold your horses. I'm coming. All right, hurry up, George, hurry up. And he comes in, he's all crooked over. He looks and she says, look at George. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, look at how beautiful that is. Now, George, you've got to admit that is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It really looked like a picture, postcard. And he looked, and he went up to the drapes. He closed the drapes. And then he looked at it and he said, Bernice, it was beautiful until the second flake. He'll never be happy. So, basically, what I'm saying is that just as joy and misery are choices, so are heaven and hell. Every single person in hell is a volunteer. People don't realize that hell is an expression of God's mercy. And when you tell them, they're going, how can that possibly be? And I said, well, can you imagine after rejecting God to be in heaven for all eternity hating him? That'd be like sitting with the person. All of you guys know some person in your parish who's so saccharine sweet that after like 2 minutes you need an insulin injection just to stay in the room. Well, can you imagine being placed with someone like that for all eternity with no hope of ever getting away or escaping? That'd be hell. Well, if a person has rejected God, to force them into heaven would be a greater hell than to be in a place where only the creative presence of God is. Because remember, wherever God creates, he is. But his sanctifying and redeeming presence are not in hell. And therefore, hell truly is an expression of God's mercy. So now, another thing, celibacy. Oh, how many times over the past years I've been told, how do you guys stand it? Don't you think the church would be a lot better off if you had marriage? And then I was in Kentucky, and I was giving a talk, and a lot of people, they were kind of questioning what the value of celibacy, and they were Catholic, and I would say, well, first of all, if you notice, we in the Catholic Church do have certain, communities that do allow married clergy, but if you notice that those communities have always remained very small. The Roman Catholic Church is a mission church. We are to the world. And because of this choice that we make to remain celibate, it enables us to do everything and anything at any time. It gives the bishop the ability to move us anywhere we want. And I was driving around Rome. I used to drive Mother Teresa. I used to drive the bishops, especially from the Eastern Rite. And one day I was driving with them, and real nice guys, and one of them looked at me and he says, we really envy you Roman writers. And I said, you do? Thanks. Why? And he said, because you do not have married clergy. And I said, I thought that was your thing. He says, oh, no, it isn't. He said, because every single time we want a priest to do something, who do we have to go through? The wife. And very rarely do we get our own way. He says, so you guys don't ever lose what you've got. But that doesn't respond to the question of why we have celibacy. Why is it that we do not get married? Well, first of all, you've all heard we're married to the church, most certainly. Well, we hear confessions. We hear the intimate sins of others. We need to be available 24/7. We really are alter Christus. But the real reason, which is so simple, I had a guy come up to me. He was a Protestant minister in Kentucky. I was in, there were 3 Baptist churches, and right across the street from the church where I was preaching, there was a Baptist minister. And he came over because he was upset because his parish had come to my mission. And he was out there afterward, and he looks at me and he said, you Catholic priests live unnatural lives. And I said, excuse me? And he said, yes, it says in Scripture that a man shall leave his mother and he shall unite with a woman. And I said, so does this mean that I'm damned because I don't do that? If I live an unnatural life, does that mean I'm going to hell if I don't get married? That because Catholic priests don't get married? And he said, precisely, it says it in Scripture. I said, okay. I said, I'm going to have some great company in hell because Jesus never got married. He chose celibacy. A man always was married by 15 or 16 years old in the time of Jesus. And so therefore, celibacy has been chosen by the church because you and I live the very life of Christ, number one. And number two, we live the life that we are going to live in heaven. We are precursors of what is going to be in heaven. Therefore, we don't get married because in heaven, no one's married. You don't really necessarily have to tell that to newlyweds, because they think that's forever. For all eternity, we're going to be in heaven looking into each other's eyes. I give yourself a couple months. Now, the shepherd, according to the sacred scripture, is a dispenser of one of the greatest gifts that God has given, mercy. I have to tell you this, that when I give missions, the first thing I do before I start the mission is I apologize. I apologize to the parishioners if they have ever been treated with anything but the utmost respect and love and tenderness in the sacrament of reconciliation. And it actually opens the door to many, many people coming back. Because you see, there was a day when they had the Irish mendicants that would travel around and they made the confession something really hard. And you had to jump through these hoops, and there were certain prayers and penances you had to say. And how many times people actually refused absolution because the priest didn't think that they were ready yet. And many saints did that too. But the thing is, that sacrament, if we turn someone away from that sacrament, it has to be an extraordinarily important, powerful reason, because it can ruin them. I remember I was in a diocese down south, and there was this, all the priests were gathered together at this big mansion, and there was this little old lady in black, and she was wearing black deliberately because all these priests were invited over. They were having this big Christmas party. And I'm walking around, I'd never been there before, and I kept looking at her, and I kept thinking, did she die? She's not moving. She's just sitting there stoic like this. And I went over to the woman who owns the house. She said, that's my mother. She hates priests. And I said, she hates priests? How could she hate priests? You got a whole herd of them in here. And she says, no, Father, you see, when she was a teenager, she fell in love with my grandpa and with my dad. And when they came to him, he said, I don't like this guy. I refuse to do the wedding. You can do better. That moment, they left that church and never came back. They got married outside the church. They were happy. They lived together. They had the best life. They had all the children, and they were, I don't know what religion they were to, but they just would never have anything to do with the Catholic Church. Now, their kids became Catholic. That's why they had all the priests running around. So once I heard that, I thought, you mean to tell me she's been sitting like this for her whole life? And you have tons of priests coming? Yeah. I went down to her, and I knelt down in front of her, and I said, please forgive us. Forgive that priest. Please forgive him. Because why would you hurt yourself because of some fool? Maybe he offended you. Maybe he hurt you. I don't know what his reasons were. But for the love of God, don't sever yourself from the truth, from the Eucharist, from salvation because of your anger. And you've got to get rid of this. You've got to forgive this guy. I was the first priest that ever apologized to her. And until her death, she was at Mass every single day from that day forward, just because I confronted her. My dear brothers, to hell with political correctness. It is a damnable thing, because what it does is it makes cowards out of Christians. It makes us step back and be afraid. You know, the only two things that the devil has, and you know that, is fear and hate. If he can fill us with either one of them, fear keeps us frozen and we do nothing. Hate keeps us ignorant, because if we hate, we will never open up to anything good, to anything holy, to learning about anything. That's why a lot of the sects that surround us try to fill their people with fear of the Catholic Church or with hate against the Catholic Church, that we're all demons and devil worshippers, and the Pope is Satan, and the priests are minions of the hell and the devil. And I've heard that many times when I'm preaching. And so what we have to do is we have to realize that the new evangelization is recognizing and going deeper, finding out where these people are at, and meeting them there. And it's not going to be a beautiful homily necessarily, because to tell you the truth, look, when you're getting dressed in the morning, and when you get old, some of you don't even know what that is yet, and it hurts to put your socks on, that is what's going to convert your people. It's not going to be how, because I could recite the ABCs. Did you ever hear the story of Bishop Sheen? Great preacher, scary looking dude, but very, very wonderful preacher. And I loved this guy when I was a kid. And I remember reading some of his stuff, and when he first got out of, he went and studied in Louvain, he studied in all these beautiful universities, and he came back and he was Father Sheen. And he went to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and they said, give us the benefit of your wisdom, Father, and could you give us a retreat? So he said, yes, I will. And so he prepared this beautiful dissertation, one after another, for hours and hours. He prepared for days. And he was going to give them all of the wisdom. And now, by the way, wisdom is not know how much you know. It's how much you know permeated with love. That's it. I found wisdom in hovels where people couldn't even write their name. So he was going about it the wrong way, but he thought it was going to be phenomenal. So after he was done, this woman came up to him in tears, little old lady, and she says, Father Sheen, I want to tell you that my life will never be the same. What you said changed my life. Thank you, Father Sheen. He's thinking, wow, this is good. All right, my dear lady, what exactly was it that brought you to such the realization that your life needed this changing? And she looked at him and she said, well, to tell you the truth, Father Sheen, I didn't understand a word you said, but I figured if I don't understand it, it must be beautiful. And at that moment, he said, that's it. He said, never again. He said, I'll newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other, and I better hit home. And if I don't, I've lost them. So you speak to the tiniest child and the oldest person and everybody in between, he would grasp. Because what he did, he really is the founder of the new evangelization. He really is. Because if you look at him, if you study what he did, you'll see that he made the truth understandable. And those are the exact words of the Holy Father when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. He said, we have to make it understood. We have to make him loved. We have to recognize that we have to deal with them. And it's not going to be the grandeur of what we say. It's not even going to be the eloquence with which we say it. It's going to be here. It's going to be getting up in the morning and doing everything for the love of God. It's going to be the time we spend praying before the Blessed Sacrament. It's going to be the sacrifices that we make. It's going to be getting up and offering every single thing up, realizing that that's exactly what we have to teach them to do. We are the first ones who have to do it. If we expect them to pray, if we expect them to suffer, if we expect them to give their lives and to devote themselves to the poor and to the suffering, that's exactly what we have to do. And the greatest way to do that is to embrace the sufferings that we get, to embrace the difficulties that we endure, and to recognize that everything has infinite power before the throne of God. That's everything. It has nothing to do with us. As I said before, God spoke through an ass in the Old Testament. And as far as I'm concerned, he was doing better with the ass for me. Because sometimes, I don't know, I get up in the morning, I don't even want to be up. But yet, it is God's grace in the soul of our people that makes what we say valuable. It's not what we say. It's what God is working in their soul. This is God's work that we are involved in. It is God who does. It is God who gives the increase. We do the little seed, and the church is this gigantic tree that blossoms from that. But we always have to remember that the seed and the branches and this beautiful big tree are one and the same, that we will always experience both the different. And you see, as priests, we understand that oftentimes it's not easy, but something, it is beautiful. It is wonderful. And look to the day of your ordination. Like I said before, we have some wonderful young priests. They're filled with that love. I always try to remember the first communion I ever received. And I always try to make sure that I receive communion with that anticipation, with that joy, with that kind of excitement. Because that really is what's happening at every Mass, and every person who rises from the dead of sin. We are bringing forth the resurrection of Christ. We are able to give them the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. But it is going to be what we are that is going to make them and what we say fruitful. Just like you have to toil the ground, so we do as priests. Everything we do, getting up in the morning, the mundane things, working in your office, dealing with some of the secretaries, even dealing with, every parish has one crazy person in it. Every parish. I've never been to one where the priest wasn't saying, "Oh, she drives me nuts." I know, yeah, I've seen it all over the place. And yet, even putting up with that stuff, even saying, "Lord, I offer this up to you. I'm going to have to deal with it for the next 50 minutes. This is yours. Help me." And then you go and do it. That is what's going to give fruit to the work that we do. It is going to be the time we spend in prayer, the time we offer to God everything that we do, everything that we are. Our prayer is just one aspect of it. Our divine office, one aspect. The time we spend before the Lord is probably the most important. Because really, when you think of it, someday you're all going to drop dead or you're going to die. And what's going to happen is you're going to be laying between heaven and hell. How many priests I helped die in my lifetime. And you know something? The one thing that was their consolation, it wasn't their name on a building. It wasn't how many churches they had. It's not even how many. I know priests who count every confession they've ever heard. It's never going to be that. It's going to be every moment that they spent with Him. Every moment that they spent before the Blessed Sacrament. Every time they looked at Him and they recognized Him in the breaking of the bread. That is the only consolation that we are going to have. And if we understand that, we realize that every Mass is a preparation for death. That every Mass, He is going to see me, when I close my eyes to this world and I open them to eternity, I'm going to look into those eyes and He is going to receive me as I have received Him. That's why every Eucharist is a preparation for death. Death shouldn't make us miserable. It shouldn't make us frightened. I love cemeteries. I'd love to live in a cemetery. And the reason is because death really gives life proper perspective. If we constantly keep death before our eyes, how would I live? How would I pray? How would I celebrate Mass? How would I speak to the people? With what love I would enter into the sanctuary. With what tenderness would I deal with the poor and the sick and with children? That is the great equalizer of life, to keep death before our own eyes. And as priests, that's really so important, because death isn't something negative, it's something joyful. Francis, happiest saint, most joyful saint in the history of the church, and every single night before he went to sleep, he meditated, contemplated his own death. And when he rose up again, he said, another day to love, another day to live, another day to give to Christ and to give Christ. That is what we need. There should be, as I said yesterday, a sense of urgency in every homily we give. Because you know something? Never think that you can give a homily as just a second thought. Because there might be somebody in that church that will die that night. And their salvation might depend upon what you say. And so make it count. Make everything count. Everything you do, and then everything becomes fodder for the homily that you give. If every aspect, every moment, every day, every minute, every night, even the beating of your heart, offering it up to God while you're sleeping, is powerful before the throne of God and helps our people. Because if we can understand that, and if we can literally live that, and I try to do that every day, and I don't succeed. And that's why I'm talking to you about this, because I'm talking, as I told you yesterday, whenever I give a talk, whenever I give a retreat, I'm giving it to me, because I'm the first one who needs what I'm telling you. I really do. You think that, I'm saying, I need this. When they told us the definition of a priest, I thought, thank God. A sinner chosen from among sinners to help sinners. Oh, that's me. I finally had hope. Do you know that during my ordination at the Vatican, they stopped the ordination? They stopped it right in the middle. And all of a sudden, word went around through the whole of the Vatican, all the guys, 80 of us. Someone was going to be pulled. I was convinced it was me. I was convinced they were going to pull me out. I figured they found out. They found out how rotten I was, how many sins I've committed. They found out that I'm the last person that should be a priest. So I kept imagining, okay, now if they come up to me and they grab me by the arm, how do I walk out with dignity? How do I walk out making the people think that, well, they decided not to ordain me to the priesthood, but make me a bishop right away? And so I was thinking, how am I going to leave? How am I going to exit? It wasn't me, which surprised me. It was some poor guy whose bishop, when he sent in the request in front of the Vatican to be ordained, he didn't even write in the lines. He just wrote over the entire sheet, "If you want to ordain him, go ahead." Didn't even sign it. And so they looked at this and they said, we can't ordain a guy with this. This is nothing. I don't even know who this is. So they kept trying to call him, and they did finally get in touch with him about 4 hours after the ordination. And the next day he was ordained by one of the wonderful cardinals at the Vatican. But you see, my brothers, I think every one of us at that Mass, at that ordination, thought they were coming after us. Because none of us are really worthy of what we have. But if we keep that before our eyes, what good we can do, what beauty we can accomplish if we just understand that it is God doing it. That despite our weakness, despite our inabilities, despite our incapacity, despite our tiredness, despite everything that goes wrong, it has very little to do with us. All we have to do is love him. Just love him. That's it. If we can just do that, if a retreat does only that, God, I want to love you, because to tell you the truth, my brothers, you and I live our entire lives in the realm of I want to. Because to feel love is going to be far away from us most of our lives. We're going to feel nothing. But if we say, God, I want to love you. I want to love you this day. I want to give you my heart. I want to love you with my whole heart and my soul, with all my strength. You do. Because to want to love with your strength, to want to love with all your heart, is to love with all your heart, because it matters nothing on how we feel. And that's something that the faithful need to understand. And the only way they can ever discover this is from men, priests, who know it because they live it. We are the ones first who have to live in the I want to, rather than being wrapped up to the seventh heaven. We may not be wrapped up in great mystic flights of beauty and the Spirit, but we will be raised up by God when we see that poor soul rise from their sin.